The spill, you lose. You have ignored the government's wins and put your own interests above all. And also interesting, Kieran, about when you're saying about the things Malcolm Turnbull has quote-unquote won or saved us from or whatever. Remember, these are all things that are precipitated and we only know about through cabinet leaks that all, surprise, surprise, were the fights that Malcolm Turnbull was on the right side of. That is how this has been long and industrial.
Here's what the most interesting thing is, though. How long ago was it now, an hour, that Malcolm Turnbull came out? Where are the ministers?
Absolutely right.
Where are the ministers lining up to publicly support the Prime Minister?
I haven't got this from the Prime Minister's office, I should stress, but there is some expectation that in about 15 minutes Tony Abbott will be holding a press conference. So very shortly we'll hear from him. Look, the difficulty, of course, for even his supporters in going out before the leader, and this is just going on the mess that happens so many times on the Labor side. Craig Emerson comes to memory, is you go out and support the leader, and this happened with Kevin Rudd when they first moved against him. In fact, the following morning, when everyone was expecting the vote to happen, the showdown in the party, and Craig Emerson was out there in the morning on the doors of Parliament saying we should stick with Kevin Rudd, we, shouldn't bring down a first-time Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd didn't put up his hand in the party room meeting. Craig Emerson was wiping egg off his face for the rest of the day. David, so you don't want to be in that situation. Yeah,
well, David, somebody who knows about the positives and negatives of that particular time is Bruce Hawker, who often joins us here on a Monday here at Sky News. Most recently,
he'd remember that moment
there with
well.
Kevin Rudd.
Very well.
You're with us now. You at one point were out there standing out the front of Kevin Rudd's house saying Julia Gillard should resign, get out of the way. Let's talk about this moment here. When you are the person challenging, what message are you trying to send, not just through what you have said publicly, but what is that key message to the waivers? Because dumping a PM, it's as big as it gets.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think it's that we can actually save a lot of seats here. I mean, we're looking at a massive number of seats going if Abbott stays on. I think that's the appeal that goes straight to the back bench. I think that's one of the reasons why you're not seeing people coming out in support of Abbott right now. They know that the game's up for him. So that's, I think, the number one message you have to go with. And of course, you can only do that if you're popular, as is Turnbull, and you've got the credibility behind you to say that I can actually make a difference, and I think he can.
Do you think the transactional costs for the Liberal Party will be as bad as it was originally with Gillard and Rudd, or has the ground been laid by polls and speculation that this is not as dramatic as going to sleep with one Prime Minister and waking up with another?
I think this is a very different situation. I think Abbott's, as we know, 30 straight news polls where they've been behind, never had a honeymoon at all. The electorate's over him. I don't think you could say the same about Kevin Rudd back in 2010, and that was why there was such a surprise and so much shock. This is very different.
This isn't good for Labor, though, is it, Bruce?
Bruce,
No, I don't
Sorry, Bruce. I was just going to ask you, what do you think about the impact on this for Labor? Malcolm Turnbull surely would present for the Labor vote a much bigger threat than Tony Abbott.
And just in that context, Bruce, before you answer, we've already received. I've already received a handful of emails. Turnbull ruling out the challenge. Turnbull on climate change. Various points that Labor's already seizing on.
Well and truly prepared.
Exactly, they're well and truly prepared. They're in the inbox already, Bruce.
Yeah, look, Labor wants to see Abbott remain. Obviously, I mean he's so unpopular. They don't want to see Turnbull in there. I think in the short term, Turnbull's going to be very, very ascendant. He'll get a big boost in the polls. We'll probably see it in Canning as well. It's going to be very, very difficult in the short term. The longer term is another story. And, of course, how he deals with issues like climate change. There's that authenticity problem, which we saw with Kevin Rudd over exactly the same issue. If Turnbull feels like...
What can he do on that? What can he say on climate change now? Can he really stick with direct action? I mean, it's something that all of us are going to keep pressing and keep pressing it. Do you really believe in this policy? How does he handle that?
I think that's a very big problem for him, a huge problem, because if he walks away from his previous position, it's like Kevin Rudd with this is the greatest moral dilemma of a lifetime, and his polls go straight down. People are very, very nervous and sensitive to that issue.
Yeah, but surely he can use, let's imagine he becomes Prime Minister, surely he can use Paris and whatever the urgent information that comes out of Paris is to justify more urgent last-minute action in the lead-up to an election. We can't forget there is a big international event that may well let Malcolm Turnbull off the hook from having to argue direct action.
I think that's right, but not just that.
Let's get Grahame Morris to jump in on this as well, Grahame. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on how you deal with that.
Oh, I think we're talking Liberal Party heresy here. We talked before about captain's picks, and if there is one sort of shift that brings Scott Morrison into the game, That is, those three things, if on the environment, on gay marriage and on the Republic. And you know, those decisions have been already made by the party. I suspect if, you know, Malcolm can tweak them a little bit, but if he wants to reverse them, I think that's not wise for him.
He won't reverse them, I don't think.
Well, Grahame, can I just make? I just like to make 2 points on that. I spoke to a minister last night who was adamant, and not a Turnbull supporter, mind you, of someone closer to Morrison, if anything, who said that Turnbull won't change the position on climate change and on same-sex marriage. Will keep things as they are as well. On climate change, the other point I think that should be made here is that Greg Hunt has achieved quite a significant amount. I know it gets derided direct action, but both he and others who believe that this issue needs to be dealt with have framed it in a way that it can easily be upscaled if need be. I don't think Turnbull's going to change this one bit. Hunt is a smart operator, and he's been able to put together a direct action plan that, when linked with the renewable energy target and the emissions reduction fund, can be turned into effectively what is an operating price on carbon. They won't call it that. Yeah, Turnbull won't change the policy, but I can tell you that Hunt and others have the capacity within that policy to upscale it if need be.
But that's an authenticity problem now. That's a real authenticity problem now for Turnbull if he goes down that line, because they'll be able to quote chapter and verse about his commitment to an emissions trading scheme. So that's where that authenticity problem will kick in. Maybe not soon enough, but in the longer term it might be a problem for him.
Yeah, I also wouldn't be surprised when we're starting to talk about things like, you know, climate change, those easy... I mean, I think we're going to see Malcolm Turnbull's, again, part of the push that he's going to put out there is some easy wins to modernise the party. Because remember, what the Labor Party has successfully done through its focus groups and through question time, through all of its strategy for the past 18 months has been, Tony Abbott is black and white TV, we're HD TV. He's odd, we're modern, he's yesterday, he's today. An example of that was the first question that they led it off in question time today was about domestic violence, was about them wanting to deal with that issue, which, as significant as it is, has sort of taken on a bit of power in the past couple of weeks, Paul, but the PM was dragging a bit.
Can I just interrupt, sorry mate, with some breaking news that Malcolm Turnbull will stick with the climate targets as they've been set to this point. He will also, I can confirm now, he will stick with a plebiscite on same-sex marriage. That has come from Mr Turnbull's office. So on those two key issues, confirmation he will stick with the climate targets and he will stick with the plebiscite on same-sex marriage.
The targets, but what about the mechanism?
Well, let's wait. Now we've asked that. If I'd like
Don't worry, you're communicating directly with them, David. They'll get in touch with you. They'll get in touch. Graham, can I just ask Grahame Morris?
I don't think we're going to reopen that debate, though.
I just want to ask Grahame Morris a quick question here, where, Graham, a lot of Liberals believe that the thing that separated them, in the same way that Labor Party people think that there's, fairly or unfairly, they believe they have greater empathy to the needy than the mean old Liberals do. A lot of Conservatives believe the thing that made them different than the Labor Party was flipping a sitting Prime Minister. Popular or unpopular, how is something not broken if this does happen? Graham?
Sorry?
No, that's all right.
Killing question. He wasn't even listening.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Graham, put simply... Yeah, I will. Graham, what gets broken and can't be put back together if the Liberals do what Labor did twice?
Because this has been... The Kevin Rudd one was an absolute shock. I don't think it's any surprise at all to the electorate, to the journalists, to mums and dads, that at some stage, probably around Christmas time, there was going to be another challenge. It just so happens it's been brought forward. I think the electorate has been expecting this for a while, and I think Malcolm's explanation as to why is a hell of a lot better than Julia Gillard's, which was, you know, a good government gone off the rails or something. She didn't have a clue why. But this is not going to be a shock to the electorate, whereas the Kevin Rudd one was.
Now, what about you, though? Is that idea about what changes for the Liberal Party? Obviously, it takes away an attack line here, but while everyone quite correctly says it's one thing, you know, the base doesn't necessarily matter, it's about the middle, but doesn't this help when 14% of the electorate is essentially none of the above in news poll? Doesn't this help either the Greens or somebody who wants to come through as third-party candidate saying, look, you can't trust either of these guys because whoever the heck they elect, they flip it if it's the wrong one?
Yeah, I think there is some truth in that, Paul. I think that some people will say, look, it just goes to our cynicism about the way in which politics is played out these days. Didn't they learn anything from what happened with the Labor Party? Having said that, I agree with Grahame. I think overwhelmingly people are ready for the change.
They've seen it coming.
Yeah, and they've seen it coming, they're prepared for it, and the polling tells you that. So I don't think there'll be a massive pushback, but I think...
Just to that end, Bruce, I mean... Just to that end, I mean, are we seeing, as a well-placed political operative and observer has just pointed out to me, are we seeing something in our political culture that is broken where we can't stick with the Prime Minister for whatever reason? We all know the reasons behind each particular one, but we can't stick with the Prime Minister for a full term. We're now in the third term, if this happens, where this has happened.
It's incredible. I mean, it's unprecedented in Australian political history, certainly recent political history, and I think this is the problem. You know, people are desperate for some stability. Whoever comes along and presents a stable alternative, whether it's Turnbull or Shorten or anybody else, I think is going to get rewarded by the electorate. Now, Labor's put in place some mechanisms to stop those sort of changes taking place. I think the Liberal Party will actually start looking at other mechanisms to be seen to be modernising in some way.
But isn't the problem, though, with again, what we've seen with the locking in and the public vote, is that, you know, it's great if you've got a candidate like Shorten, but if we've just seen in the UK, the base is more left than where the country is. So essentially, if you lock that in, you get the unelectable person who's going to be there for 4 years.
Well, it's a bit more complicated in the UK because they've got not only members, but they've got the unions and they've got these sort of fellow travellers who can pay £3 and come in and vote, and that's part of the problem. I think if the party's base was broadened, then you get a lot of more middle ground sort of people coming in because they'd have a role in the election of the leader, which is what the sort of thing that John Howard's talking about right now, by the way.
But also, when we talk about the number of times flipping Prime Ministers, I mean, PVO, 4 Prime Ministers in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to laugh at places like Italy and Japan. That's Australia.
Yeah.
That's not Wikipedia, that's Australia.
Let me just make a point too. Let me just make a point to Tony Abbott. If he does lose tonight or tomorrow morning, he'd be the first Prime Minister not to live in the Lodge since I don't know when, but we'd have to go back in the history books and have a look because they've been renovating the Lodge. He hasn't actually had a chance to move in there. So that was an interesting side note.
David Spears may well finally be renovated to Malcolm Turnbull's taste.
Just while we're on the trivia front, I should mention the Malcolm Turnbull's Chief of Staff right now, and it hasn't been reported anywhere, but he's on a 6-week holiday, Malcolm Turnbull's Chief of Staff. He's a departmental officer. He's not a political operative, but he's from the department. He must have sniffed something, thought, I haven't got much more to add on the politics. I'm out of here. He's on a road trip through the United States, apparently, for 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, probably a good time if you're not the political operative to be there.
Maybe
you won't be surprised to hear Malcolm Turnbull has other political operatives in his office.
Fear not, their job. But fear not, Peter Credlin was Chief of Staff at one point to Malcolm Turnbull. Maybe he'll keep her as a transitional head of the office.
But also interesting when you're talking about those early reactions and things. And look, you know, I'm not going to give the free ad at a time where a lot of people are watching. But bookie reactions to all of this. One of them, the start of the day, the government was $1.70 to win the election. Now there's a great belief with the potential change in leader. They're now down to $1.45.
Yeah.
So again, this question here. Okay, we are jumping a few hurdles here, but how does Labor take on somebody who essentially is able to argue it's too early to flip back to a government when we've reset, we've modernised, we've done all the stuff that annoyed you about the last mob?
Well, it's very difficult in the short term for him to do that. And the big challenge here will be, well, the big question is, would Turnbull, if he wins, go to an early election legitimately to demand a mandate from the electorate because he wasn't elected as Prime Minister, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So that is not beyond the realms of possibility that they could actually go to an early election.
I think he wants to avoid that, but that is an option as far as perhaps early next year goes. In say, March, avoid the budget, for example. But then again, he would want, I think, to own a budget. The issue will be how he's travelling in the polls. I don't see it late this year. They would see that as a rush to the polls that is what Julia Gillard did to some extent. They would hope not to need to do that. But I could see early next year being on the cards.
Perhaps.
Yeah, but also... And
just for followers of political trivia, point out that a few people are texting on this. Well, actually, Chris Bowen tells me that Ben Chifley was the last PM not to live in the Lodge. He chose not to.
He did.
Someone else, though, I love this bit of political trivia on the sidelines on days like this. Someone said Scullum was the last one. Anyway, what happens if Malcolm Turnbull takes over? We are heading into a key period, not just in terms of next year's budget. I reckon before that, you've got some big international meetings coming up. The UN General Assembly, Kieran, is week after next. You've got the G20 meeting, APEC and so on. A great moment for someone new in the job to strut the world stage, rub shoulders with Obama, with Merkel, with all the world leaders at these events and, enhance their leadership standing, their prime ministership, if you like, with a spurt on the world stage. It worked for Gillard, didn't it, whenever she was in trouble? Everyone was so full of praise of how she looked prime ministerial finally on the world stage. So there's that opportunity there, but the great risk, of course, in spending so much time, as they really have to this time of year, summit season it's known as, is that they're not here tending to the flock, and you are going to have a divided Liberal Party. Make no mistake, you are going to have Conservatives here who have been loyal to Tony Abbott, who are going to fight this, and this is, assuming if Malcolm Turnbull wins, as some expect he will, many, I should point out, expect he will. If he wins, he's going to be leading a divided party. It's one thing to say we're not going to shift on gay marriage or climate change or press the Republic button, and, quite frankly, Turnbull said he doesn't think we'll have a Republic while Queen Elizabeth's on the throne. But doing that's not enough. You are going to have angry MPs, angry front benches. You might get rid of some of them, but you are going to have a divided flock, and dealing with that is never easy. Then you've got the economic reform challenges with the tax reform white paper, the Federation white paper coming back in, the backbench itching for something on industrial relations and the business community, not to mention as well. How do you deal with all of that in relatively quick period of time before putting out some reforms ahead of the election? You can't leave this stuff until well into next year. This has to be dealt with very promptly. He no doubt's been given some consideration of all of this, Kieran, you would think, in the lead up to making this decision, pulling the trigger as he has today. But boy, he's going to have to hit the ground running.
And a lot of that is going to come down to who's in the cabinet. You can expect to see a number of those Conservatives that you mentioned elevated to cabinet. And also Scott Morrison.
If he doesn't have Morrison already lined up as treasurer,
that's key.
How would they work through any of this? How would they know where they're going to go?
Well, Morrison is central to all of what you just said there. He needs Morrison as treasurer. In fact, from my reckoning, that is the only way they can rebuild and have a period of healing and move on. You're always going to get a rump of disgruntled. That's the bottom line. The challenge is to make sure that they've got enough, in terms of Morrison and other senior members of the Conservative element of the party that have backed Abbott so strongly, who will be elevated to cabinet and try and rebuild and move on.
And you know this, we all know this. Graham and Bruce know this very well. The momentum in politics can flip on a dime. At the moment, it's been against Abbott for so long. Something like this changes. There's great fascination in the new leader. There's a lot of soft, fluffy pieces, but also there's a great depth of goodwill for Malcolm Turnbull, I think, in the electorate as well. If that does change the momentum, if that does suddenly put a lot of pressure on Bill Shorten and Labor and their fairly shaky positions on things like the free trade agreement, tax reform, industrial relations reform,
union
and so
corruption.
on, well, we could be seeing a very different dynamic in Australia.
We'll be at the election very quickly if that happens.
Yeah, but also don't forget, there was something that was very significant in February, and something that arguably saved Tony Abbott's job back in February, which was the way the base reacted. And a lot of different groups have been credited on this, but this is the phones running hot with people that unlike something that either happens in the middle of the night or maybe happened a couple of generations ago, people are watching this in real time and essentially in business hours. So everything from electorate offices to the offices in Canberra, the members of the public who desperately, who may be more passionate about Tony Abbott than their local MP is, they're going to be in a scenario now where they're being screamed at from both directions. Peter, when you talk to people about this in Canberra, how do they, because there is the electoral reality, but then there's also the people they need to get them over the line, or dare I say the members of the party, the rank and file, who would be going nuts this afternoon. Which voice do you think they listen to?
Well, I think some of them would be going nuts. It's an interesting one to know just how many. Obviously, a larger proportion of Liberal Party members, according to the polls, always support Tony Abbott over Malcolm Turnbull. But there's two things to say about that. One is that I think that you would see that sizably change if the incumbent was Malcolm Turnbull, just because a large number of them are loyalists to whomever is the existing Liberal Party leader. It could be Donald Duck. But the second factor to that is how many of them, we talked a little bit about this before, how many of them are even going to change their vote if there is a change of Liberal leader? They're never going to vote for Bill Shorten. So they might be upset. They might try to get in the ear of their MPs at this particular point in time. But as I understand it, the people that are really in the ear of MPs, not just marginal MPs, but safe seat Liberal MPs that I've spoken to as well, are members of the community, people that are prepared to vote either way, and they're not currently prepared to vote for them. And that's what is really motivating them at a time like this, because the polling has been so bad. I've written repeatedly, as you know, that I think the transaction costs of change are too risky.
David, I agree.
The unknowns are risky. I still hold that view, but I don't think that's the view anymore of most of the members of the Parliamentary Liberal Party, simply because they're on the front line and they've seen the reaction coming their way from genuine swinging voters who are saying to them, I'm not going to vote for you guys, I'm no chance of it.
Well, correct. Well, also, I think we can all agree. There are two, if we had to sort of focus in on two articles that best show this dilemma that Liberal MPs are in. There was the one that Fairfax put out a couple of weeks ago that literally coloured in 36 MPs who were going to lose their seats, if Ipsos was correct. And secondly, the one that was in the Telegraph only last week, essentially with a shopping list of those who were about to lose their jobs, who were essentially being called out as being disloyal. Now, this is something that when it happened in retrospect, and people talked about the way it happened in the Labor Party, particularly the calling out of those you think are the treacherous ones, that always ends up being a decisive factor against the incumbent leader holding on to their job. Nobody gets scared once their name's in the paper.
No, that's exactly right. And I just think these MPs know that they're staring political death in the face. Like they say, back self-interest, it's a horse that'll be trying. And that's where they'll be. I think tomorrow that's exactly where they're going to be.
And also, I think, David, when I talk about this as well, about that the base and the base's reaction and the jumping on the phone and the aggravation that's there, I think that because this has happened so quick, so late in the day, it's different than the scenario in February, where for a couple of days people could ramp up, could turn to their favourite columnist.
Great point. It was backbench-led. This is more organised.
Yeah, correct. And that all comes down to, again, the role, should this be successful, the role of Julie Bishop, the timing of Julie Bishop, the role of her as a representative of the Western Australian MPs, freeing them to do so, and also the fact that it all comes through the prism of this by-election, which, let's be honest, the government does not fall if Canning is lost. It's about what it represents. So there's a lot of people trying to make this Canning being the line in the sand rather than
a bigger deal than it is.
Correct.
And you've made that point from the outset, when the Canning by-election really came onto the radar, that it wasn't the be-all and end-all, and it's not. It is one of those, I guess, testing points. Now, why is Turnbull wanting to get in before the Canning by-election? We've teased this around a bit, but perhaps we should explore this a bit more. Grahame Morris, why now? Why not after Canning? Why not the next time Parliament sits?
Because the grass is dry, the backbenchers were ready, and all of a sudden we had a few people in the ministry and in the cabinet shift. And look, you were talking before, Australians are fantastic at giving, if there is a new change, at giving a new leader a fair go. There would be a bounce in the polls, no doubt about it. And that is quite tricky for Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, because the difference, and if I think if there is a change and you look back, I think the Prime Minister Abbott and Treasurer Hockey somebody would say to them, what was the big thing we did wrong? And I think it's the why you're doing things. We're going to do this because, and keep batting every single media outlet, we've got to do this because. And I suspect that a lot of people who would say that's where Prime Minister Turnbull, if he gets there, is very good at explaining the why and keeping going on every blinking media outlet until he gets his message through. Malcolm is a very, very good communicator. And I suspect we could have, if there's a change tomorrow, we could have quite a circuit breaker that make things quite awkward for the Labor Party.
Well, I also think what you said too, Grahame, which is that when we talk about the communicators, one of the most successful communicators and one of the most successful people to achieve what they set out to do is Scott Morrison. So back to Kieran's point where I agree, he becomes such a key part of all of this about who is where, both in how easy this transition is, and then secondly, if he's promised a job, how successful that government could be going forward. Joining us at the desk as well, gentlemen, is Graham Richardson, host of Richo and Jones, Labor Party power broker. But you, like I, were somewhat surprised that today is the day, not after Canning.
I'm staggered and stunned by two things. Firstly, the timing. I thought next week would have been quite likely. It was a bad result, and all the polls say it will be. I thought maybe next Tuesday it was on. To call it this week, in the week before a by-election, has never been done. It is staggering. You risk being called a wrecker. They must have thought the result was going to be pretty bad.
The Parliament won't sit for 3 weeks after Canning.
Well, I know the Parliament won't sit, but that doesn't mean you can't stand up and get a ballot. We had ballots when the Parliament wasn't sitting. You get up and demand one. You bring them on. And that's what would happen if you were being serious. But this time, there's a big difference here. I mean, I did some checking on the way over here. I don't think this is close. I think it's going to be 2-1 or near
Turnbull's
to it. In Turnbull's favour. There has been a massive switch of the biggest faction, which is the I want to save my seat faction. They've moved.
In which case, does Abbott put his hand up? If it's 2-1, as you're suggesting, and I don't think you're going to be far off, should Tony Abbott put his hand up or do what Kevin Rudd did and not contest?
Well, I think that Tony Abbott's done enough for Australia, whether you like him or not, to not be embarrassed. If I was Tony Abbott, I wouldn't run, but my understanding is he's going to. As of an hour ago, the answer is definitely yes. Mind you, as he makes more and more calls and discovers the lack of support, he may change his mind, but he's a fighter. He doesn't walk away easily. I imagine at this stage of the game, he still thinks he'll stand.
The elephant in the room,
does this help or hurt the Liberals in Canning, though, if they do make the change to Malcolm Turnbull this week?
Arguably, it'll help. Tony Abbott is very unpopular. There's no doubt about that. And in Western Australia, it's no different to what it is everywhere else. He's very unpopular. And I think they all believe that they'll stand a better chance by having someone who stands up. They know Joe Hockey's gone. There's so many positives out of this. That's why it's breaking the rules. That's why Turnbull's doing something that's never been done before.
So Julie Bishop presents as the saviour in Canning rather than the one with the blood on her hands. She goes in there and says, we had to make this change to give us a chance in Canning.
Well, you can never cast Julie Bishop, given the style of person she is, as a backstabber. She doesn't wield the knife. You know, she just wields charm, and she does it pretty well.
She does walk past the kitchen. She does walk past them in the kitchen every now and then. Remember, in February, she was a little slow to react. But sorry,
in her defence, though, if the party room is that of that view to that extent, and you know, I'm not sure if it will be 2-1, but if there's an overwhelming view that she's picked up as deputy leader or has been presented to her by the various players, that it's that emphatic, isn't it incumbent on the deputy leader to do what she's done?
Well, I've got to say,
and the fact is, she hasn't had the best relationship with the Prime Minister's office for a long time now. And while she wasn't out there definitively in February, there was a very, fairly strong feeling that she was moving away from Abbott. You'll remember the story that we broke on Sky News, that the Prime Minister requested her to give a guarantee she wouldn't challenge him at Kirribilli House back in February. She didn't give the guarantee. It was pretty clear then she was shifting. The Foreign Minister and Peter Credlin don't get on at all, and the relationship with the Prime Minister's office to this point has been diabolical.
Well, look, I'll be honest, I don't think Julie Bishop's going to slide out of this without, a hint of blood somewhere near her, whether it's on her hands or anything else. The point is, if she's the one who walked into the PM's office at 1:30 today and said, mate, you've got to go, I'm hereby releasing, she's going to be part of the drama. The question, of course, will now be, where does Morrison go? But, Richo, we've sat there and passionately talked for years on our own shows or these together about, as Professor Peter says, the transactional cost, as pub talkers, the kick in the arse that comes. What happens to the Liberal Party if they change a sitting Prime Minister and they are, quote unquote, as bad as the rest of them?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question because it hasn't happened really before, and Malcolm is a risk. Everyone is acting today as if he's some sort of certainty. Well, he showed when he was leader he wasn't all that good. So I think it's a risk, but I think it's a risk I'd take if I were them. I mean, at the end of the day, he just doesn't seem to be able to cut the mustard, poor old Tony, so you got to do something else. But I'd say this, you asked about Scott Morrison. I spoke to Scott this morning after being interviewed on Channel 9. I rang him between Channel 9 and Sky. And I said, mate, what's going on? I said, you're not a duplicitous type. You said you were sticking with the Prime Minister. And you did that on Friday. How do you dump him today? And he said, I'm not going to. He said, I'll be voting for the Prime Minister if there's a challenge, but I don't expect there'll be one. That was his view. Now,
what if the Prime Minister doesn't run?
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit late for him to mount a challenge now. I think it's very late in the day. If the ballot's on tomorrow and you've had Malcolm Turnbull doing all this week, all this work over the last 2 weeks, and by the way, how did they keep it this secret?
Well, that's the question that I want.
Brilliant job. It's a brilliant job. I've got to take my hat off to Malcolm. You can't do this and talk to 30 people and keep it secret, and he did.
Well, this is the thing. PVO, what is the lesson that Malcolm Turnbull and his people have learnt between February, when they tried to do it from the backbench, and today, when they've been able to get Julie Bishop to walk in and say to the PM, you're done?
Well, the big thing I think they've learned is that Malcolm Turnbull genuinely wasn't a candidate then. And not all of those 39 then were Turnbull supporters. I think his numbers now, he's probably got some of those that weren't Turnbull supporters then because of the changed circumstances, but then he's also got a wider array. The front bench are on board. What that was backbench driven because of dissatisfaction with the Prime Minister. Let's not discount dissatisfaction with the Prime Minister's office, and that's code for his Chief of Staff, and dissatisfaction with a whole bunch of things going wrong with the government. What's happened since then is that the front bench has been alerted to how the backbench feel. Now, are enough of the backbench still on board? How many of the front bench come across? A lot more come across with Julie Bishop being in the mix, make no mistake. But Graham Richardson making the point about Scott Morrison probably doesn't help, quite frankly, because there's a difference between him running dead versus him telling a prominent commentator that he'll be backing the Prime Minister. So this is still complicated going forward.
But they didn't expect it today.
But these things have a momentum, don't they? And as people start seeing the sand falling away, they decide they're going to go.
Labor's better at that than the Liberals are, though.
Well,
Bruce Walker, you guys are more clinical.
We just had more
Let me just make a sound note of caution in all of this. We do all need to be careful that in the midst of these sort of contests, in the point that we're in now where it's still up for grabs, the media does tend to get used by both sides of a leadership debate to pump up the numbers on both sides. So we need to be aware of that at the very outset and not get too carried away by one side or the other saying, we got the numbers. Now, we can report that, yes, there are people saying they've got the numbers, but you bear in mind the grain of salt with all of that, that in the midst of all of this is how the media is used. Let's, maybe a pillar of salt. Let me bring in Nikki Sava, columnist with the Australian newspaper and political commentator Kerry-Anne Walsh, who join us at this time on a Monday afternoon each week. Very good to see you, and what an afternoon to be here. Kerry-Anne, first to you. It surprised a lot of people, of course, this has come on so quickly today. But what are your thoughts on how this has been done and where it's going to end?
Well, I think it will end with, big call here, will end with Malcolm Turnbull being the Prime Minister, and I think there was no other way they could do it, really. I think it was a very powerful way to bring it on with Julie Bishop going in. She's got significant stature within the party. She's got great appeal to women. I think that that was a powerful blow, and it's something that the party has been looking for and the country has been looking for some time. The leadership skills of the Prime Minister have been absent for a very long time, and I think that line that Malcolm Turnbull used about 30 losing news polls in a row was...
Well, that's the strongest argument.
And we've reported this afternoon that, before we go to Nikki Savage, just quickly, Malcolm Turnbull has said that he's going to stick with the approach on same-sex marriage, having a plebiscite, and on the climate change approach. That makes sense, given
for the time being,
they were the risks for him internally.
Yes, sure, but for the time being, I think that's what you'd have to do. You can't go radically changing your approach in the lead up to an election. But if he won the election, then he's got his imprimatur on the win, and he has the right to shape his ministry and the approach to government that he sees fit in consultation. That is his big challenge.
He won't want his colleagues contemplating that right now.
No, that's right.
He won't want his colleagues contemplating that he might shift on those things, and that's a sensitive issue for all of them.
Yes.
Nikki Sava, now you've been writing, for, I was going to say some weeks, some months, perhaps longer, about the failures of Tony Abbott as Prime Minister. What do you think about what's happening today, where this is heading, and how Tony Abbott can handle this best from here?
Well, I think it was all completely foreseeable and should have been avoidable if only Tony Abbott had been prepared to take the necessary steps, and he didn't. So he has effectively brought this on himself, and I think what will happen is pretty obvious. I think if he doesn't lose the job tomorrow, he certainly will within a very short period of time. So I don't
Nikki,
think,
what's your sense? Because It's not like you've just saying this today. You've been saying this for months now in terms of your analysis of where this government's at. What's your best guess as to what happens when this vote is held, most likely tomorrow when the normal Liberal Party room is held?
Well, I think Malcolm Turnbull will be elected leader and Julie Bishop will be re-elected deputy leader. And I think people will be agonising. There will be some people agonising overnight over their decision. But if they want to make a clean succession, then that will be the best way for them to go. And I think rather than prolong the agony, it would be best just to do it as cleanly and as efficiently as possible tomorrow. So I don't think that Turnbull and his people would have moved if they didn't think they had the numbers. And Turnbull, look, we know he's been working on this for quite some time. He has been building bridges with an awful lot of people, including people in the right. And he has been making, you know, the right kind of noises to them about where he intends to take the party, how he intends to handle government. Now Nikki, and they will expect him to deliver on that.
I want to ask you, you're well plugged in with all of these movements that have been underway. What's been key as far as I can see today is Julie Bishop. Now, throughout the day, you know, there was talk about this coming on today. Peter Van Onselen and I were talking about it earlier this afternoon, even at midday, about the prospects of it happening today. But the message I was getting was that Julie Bishop would be key. And ultimately, just prior to 2 o'clock, she did go in and visit the Prime Minister. At what point do you think, when and why, did Julie Bishop come on board with Malcolm Turnbull to do this?
Well, I'm not sure exactly when, but I thought it was significant this morning when Julie Bishop was in front of a bank of cameras and she said, I'm not going to answer any questions on the leadership. If she had intended to stick by the Prime Minister, she would have said so, like her other colleagues who had been lining up to do so this morning. Now, I think Julie has also had to weigh up quite a few decisions along the way. Does she want to stay deputy? Does she want to stay foreign minister? Obviously she does. And she does not want to go into opposition. And I think Julie has realised over the last few months that sticking with Abbott means, you know, losing government, and she doesn't want that to happen.
And from one key figure in this to another, Scott Morrison, Kerry-Ann, before we get Nikki Savva's thoughts on this, Scott Morrison at this stage, well, we don't know exactly what he's going to do. We know that he won't contest a ballot against Tony Abbott, but he's not ruled out contesting if it's a one-on-one against Malcolm Turnbull if Tony Abbott did stand down. How important is it that Turnbull, if he is elected leader, has Morrison as Treasurer to I suppose as part of the healing process to bring a big chunk of the party with them?
I would imagine it was extremely important. I can't imagine the scenario of a Turnbull versus Scott Morrison leadership ballot. He's young, he's relatively inexperienced, he's got a lot of potential, he's got a low popularity rating in the electorate. Why would he do it now? It would be a real high wire act in terms of his saleability to the electorate. It would only be something that internally would be considered to block Malcolm Turnbull, and that's then would be almost a defeatist type of attitude, that you're doing it for internal political reasons rather than with an eye to keeping government. So I don't think that that's a saleable proposition. I mean, I could be proved wrong, but I think there's got too many question marks over it. But I think that he would certainly restore. He's a very good salesman. He can flog anything. I think he'd be brilliant out there in private enterprise. You could give him a brief and he'd run with it, and I think he'd do very well as Treasurer.
Nikki Savva, your thoughts on those points that Kerry-Ann made in that original question as well, regarding just how pivotal Morrison is in this, in trying to rebuild and what is inevitably going to be an attempt at a healing process?
Well, I agree with most of what Kerry-Ann said. Scott Morrison will be leader of the Liberal Party one day, but it won't be tomorrow. Even his biggest fans inside the Liberal Party, MPs, concede when you speak to them that they believe he's not ready yet. He needs more time. And I think, you know, when he wakes up in the morning, he will probably concede that to himself as well. And I think that while he will not be out there campaigning, obviously, for Malcolm, I don't think that he will campaign against him. And in the interests of as clean a succession as possible, I think he will work with Tony Abbott. He will make a very good treasurer, and I think if they all hang together, this is the thing, it's not enough just for Malcolm to promise that, you know, he will not shift too far to the right, but the right has to swing in behind Malcolm as well to make sure that it all works. And that's where I think Scott will be important. And Scott's, I think, first objective will be for the Liberal Party to remain in office.
Paul Murray wanted to come in with a question there, Paul.
Yeah, Nikki, I wanted just to spread this out not just to you but to the entire panel, which is that a key thing that Malcolm Turnbull said was that he wanted a return to cabinet government. This is not too dissimilar to where Julia Gillard was when it came to consulting with the backbench, because clearly there are some ministers that they need to win over. Brass tacks here. We know that things in the lead up to February had fallen apart in the cabinet because the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff was sitting in the cabinet room, and that there were huge issues between cabinet ministers and an unelected person sitting in the room. That has changed, but what has broken down in the way those people in that room talk to each other? It's happened again. Nikki Sava?
Oh, well, look, there's no doubt that Credlin was a huge factor in all this as well. There were signs that she was reasserting herself, and that was not going down very well inside the party, that she was still, you know, isolating people. So I think what's happened is that there wasn't enough change or enough improvement to satisfy people that, you know, Abbott and Credlin knew what had to be done to revive the government. Now, you know, it's very, very easy to blame, you know, just one person, but ultimately the fault lies with Abbott for not making sure that proper processes were followed. And this happened time and time again, especially with the changes to citizenship that he tried to foist on the cabinet a few months ago. And okay, last week it worked very well with the Syrian refugees, but that was too little too late, I'm afraid.
But also it only works in part because...
The point about... Yeah, I was going to say the point about... okay. So I'm just getting some confirmation that Tony Abbott will be fighting this contest. There will be a ballot. We haven't been in too much doubt about that. But confirmation that the Prime Minister will be contesting this, so we will have actually a party room vote. When that will be, we would expect tomorrow morning. But there will be a contest. We can confirm for you on that. This question about cabinet process. Now, Nikki, it is important. I think it's probably eye-glazing for a lot of voters as to how cabinet should or shouldn't work. Kevin Rudd had his kitchen cabinet of 4. You know, everyone hails Bob Hawke's cabinet as the best functioning cabinet. And Kerry-Anne, keen for your thoughts on this as well. But I mean, each cabinet is different, isn't it? In the Nikki, you first on the way that it operates. I mean, were there examples where, you know, the way it should work was flagrantly breached by Tony Abbott?
Well, I mentioned one before with the citizenship, you know, proposal that he put up without circulating the cabinet submission, you know, without giving people time to consider what was being proposed. Well, you know, Kieran Gilbert knows very well how all this happened because he was the first one to report it. Now, but that wasn't an isolated incident. I mean, there had been other cases where, say, for instance, the National Security Committee of Cabinet had met and decided on an issue, and then before it went to Cabinet, it was actually leaked to a newspaper, to wit, the Daily Telegraph. So fingers were being pointed straight at the PMO for that. So, you know, all this kind of behaviour really made people feel like they were either taken for granted, or they weren't valued, or they just felt insulted and superfluous. Now, you cannot operate a government like that. For a government to succeed, for a cabinet to succeed, there has to be trust, and there has to be consultation, and there has to be proper process. And the best cabinets have all operated that way. The Hawke cabinet was operating like that, as was the Howard cabinet. You can't think that you can, you know, change the rules or make it work the way you want it to work. There's a reason why those processes are in place, and they are to protect everybody, including the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and they're also...
So once you start flaunting them, or, you know, trying to take advantage of people, then the system starts to break down.
There also has to be an acknowledgement that while there is a cabinet process, there has to be a very strong link to the backbench. And certainly John Howard recognised that, and so Arthur Sinodinos played that role exceptionally well as Howard's Chief of Staff. That hasn't been played in this instance. There's been a great disconnect between the backbench and the PMO, and the Cabinet has operated pretty much, you know, in many instances without coordination, comments from departments and things, you know, chucked in at the last minute. It's sort of reminiscent of when the whole Rudd regime was falling apart in the first place. And let me and what you had, if we hark back to the Hawke cabinet, was an incredibly consultative process, and that was why they were so very, very effective. And the cabinet process actually arched out from the actual table to the communities and primary stakeholders like the union movement, like business, etc., with the Accord, with the summits, etc. So it truly was a democratic government.
Just quickly on the Sinodinos, you mentioned Sinodinos. I think when the history of this is written, we will look back at the fact that, for right or wrong, he was disgruntled big time with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. Yes. And just his role in terms of how this is unfolded, I think is going to be very interesting to consider.
Let me ask you, Kerry-Ann, about Labor. I mean, how will this go down? A change in leadership to Malcolm Turnbull. What do you think this will mean for Bill Shorten and Labor?
I think that the person that would have been turning ashen today was Bill Shorten. I think it doesn't bode well for him at all, because all the tappings into the public mood showed that it was a case of, you know, a choice between arsenic and rat poison. So now, where you've got a choice of somebody who's incredibly popular, or has been and has always been popular in the polls, and somebody who's never been particularly popular, which is Bill Shorten, the whole game has been turned on its head.
It's just gone 5:30 here in Canberra. To recap, if you've just joined us, and the news just in the last 5 minutes, that we've confirmed that Tony Abbott will fight this challenge from Malcolm Turnbull. There will be a party room vote. We expect that ballot to take place tomorrow morning here in Canberra. Parliament is, of course, sitting this afternoon. This all began, though, with some fairly rapid-moving events today. Throughout the afternoon, throughout the day, there had been negotiations, backroom discussions going on to try and convince Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister and Deputy Liberal Leader, to come on board with Malcolm Turnbull. And obviously at some point today, or prior to today, that had happened. And just prior to question time at 2 p.m, Julie Bishop marched into the Prime Minister's office, told Tony Abbott he should resign or call a leadership spill. Malcolm Turnbull, after question time, did the same and resigned from the front bench, resigned as Communications Minister. He then fronted the cameras to declare that he is challenging for the top job.
This is not a decision that anyone could take lightly. I have consulted with many, many colleagues, many Australians, many of our supporters in every walk of life. And this course of action has been urged on me by many people over a long period of time. It is clear enough that the government is not successful in providing the economic leadership that we need. It is not the fault of individual ministers. Ultimately, the Prime Minister has not been capable of providing the economic leadership our nation needs. He has not been capable of providing the economic confidence that business needs.
Bill Shorten, just quickly, is going to hold a press conference in 10 minutes from now, and obviously talking about the Liberal leadership. I'm not sure that's the smartest move in the middle of all of this, but Bill Shorten is going to weigh in. Kieran.
Keep your head down is would be my message in the press.
Absolutely.
Let them do it. But
isn't that the real 101? You know,
exactly.
when one party's lurching from crisis to crisis, you let them go
Leave
for
them
it.
to it. And
there's some other pressing matter we've missed.
In terms of just recapping on the Turnbull, the key statements, if you've just tuned in, as you heard there, that was the general pitch. It really was, we could drill it down to a couple of key points. One was that Tony Abbott's prosecution of the government case has not worked, has not succeeded. Two, that it's been essentially simplistic. You were saying that slogans won't work. We've got to explain our vision to the Australian people. And the other key element was returning traditional government, good cabinet government. Here's what Mr Turnbull had to say on that.
We need to restore traditional cabinet government. There must be an end to policy on the run and captain's calls. We need to be truly consultative with colleagues, members of parliament, senators and the wider public. We need an open government.
Richo, we've been waxing lyrical about cabinet processes and the Hawke government. Now, of course, you're a part of this. Keen for your thoughts on the contrast. If this is a key criticism of Tony Abbott and the way he runs cabinet, I mean, is there a big difference in your view?
Oh yeah, I think it's best illustrated by what happened on same-sex marriage, where I think Tony totally stuffed it up, just completely mucked up the whole process and told different stories to different people and didn't consult the cabinet. He consulted a cabinet minister, namely Erica Betts. I have to say to you, by the way, if you want a big future in politics, that's not the bloke I'd be consulting, but nonetheless that's what he did, and it meant the rest of the cabinet were just on the sidelines. They didn't matter, and it meant that people who have supported him really strongly, the Pines and the Brandises, etc., they would simply cast aside. They meant nothing. It created a fury, and I think if you don't consult your cabinet, you're gone. Now, I think both of your guests were dead right. I mean, there's no way Hawke would have ever done that. He was ultra consultative, and sometimes on big issues we had cabinet meetings that lasted 3 days. Two of them concern me. One of them.
I know, Richo, you mentioned the gay marriage issue, and that's a very good point, because I can tell you that for, at least two cabinet ministers, they described that to me as a bit of a breaking point in terms of their support and support beyond that within the party for Tony Abbott.
Yeah, it did, but I think you've got to remember that that's not the only thing that hurt Tony Abbott. In the end, I think Malcolm Turnbull campaigned on the number of news polls in a row they'd been behind, and then in the last 3 weeks, when those news polls were registering an 8-point gap, that really hit home. If you're in a marginal seat, you said, well, I'm gone, and that did get them to change. One other point I wanted to make earlier on is that if you're looking at things that hurt Tony Abbott over time, do not underestimate the damage the Bronwyn Bishop saga did to him. You remember it was 18 days in when he sacked her. 18 days in, everybody in the Liberal Party, and I mean everyone, and that included Peter Credlin, by the way, knew after 2 days she had to go. He simply wouldn't act. I think that did him enormous damage.
But also, and we talk about the pub test and all that sort of stuff, but in the electorates, you talk to front benchers, back benchers. Paul Murray, that was the thing that resonated. It was the thing that people picked up. Well, look, short of Bill Shorten and the Royal Commission, it was probably one of the only things the vast majority of people who listen to FM radio, who, too busy playing the Xbox, actually it sinks in that that's what's actually taking place. The vast majority of people who have to vote rather than choose to vote, those are the sorts of things that pierce. Now, look, I know that we're talking about this as an inevitability, but I just want to say, as I did at the start of this conversation, that I believe that there are millions of people across the country who think, regardless of what is about to happen, that this is wrong, that it is the people who should hire and fire prime ministers, and it's not the same as leading a political party, but the truth is that it is the members of the party who decide who is its leader. So I just wanted to say we're getting all those things.
You can never get rid of a leader.
I want to make a point on this.
Can I just say, we can't just pretend that there's not a lot of people watching TVs in airports, in shopping centres, everywhere, thinking, what the hell is going on here?
I think I got one piece of advice for Tony Abbott. Not that he's shown himself all that keen to take my advice over the last few years, but if I were he, I wouldn't have the ballot tomorrow, I'd have it on Thursday, because the one thing that Malcolm can't get between now and Thursday is the Liberal Party. He can't get the party. He might be able to get the caucus. He can't get the party. Hold this up for a couple of days if I was the Prime Minister, because the pressure that will go on all these MPs who've changed their minds will be massive.
But can he seriously do that?
Absolutely.
From the grassroots of the
How does
party.
he do that when there's a
He
party
simply
room meeting?
stands up and he says, I do believe that everyone in this parliamentary party should have a couple of days to think about the consequences of what is a very big decision
Talk to your
for us all.
electorates.
Well,
Absolutely.
then
Just do it.
Then that's a problem then for Julie Bishop, because she's gone in there and opened up the door. She's the most popular Liberal MP in Western Australia.
They've been waiting to smoke her out for a long
They can't do that
time.
ahead of Canning, sure.
Well,
I mean,
Malcolm's done this in front of Canning.
correct,
That means the rules are just out. He can do what he likes,
If he
Tony.
did that, look,
I
don't
agree.
get me wrong, I think
He should fight.
for Abbott personally, that is a great solution, except for the fact that they'll probably then lose Canning, and then he'll go anyway. Because he'll have dragged
He wins
it
a
out
ballot
for
this
so
week. He
long.
won't be a ballot next week.
No, but let's be honest. Let's imagine. I think Tony Abbott should fight it because there are a lot of people in that base who are furious. But secondly, it shouldn't be an easy thing to remove the Prime Minister. It should be a loud and
Sure, it's
bloody
easy.
process.
Trust me, it is.
easy to
It
me.
really is
Hang on,
not easy.
hang on.
a lot easier.
No, but I'm saying it should be a bloody process. It shouldn't be something that just happens through a series of well-controlled leaks, and then we all turn around and give the shopping list of mistakes of the government that all happen to be leaks that were advantageous to Malcolm Turnbull. Julie Bishop should have to pay a price for being a leader, a deputy leader, who is now going in for her fourth Liberal leader. Yes. We should have a conversation about the country. But
Yeah,
sometimes, at what point do you have this conversation? Instead, we're just going to cover the horse race and say, oh, well, Turnbull's put his hand up, he's going to win, bugger it, put it up with it.
Let's pick up on that. Let's pick up on that because I want to get Kerry Ann's thoughts on this, who's written extensively as to the relationship of the media in these leadership spills, of which, of course, we're an important part. Kerry Ann, your thoughts?
Well, the media does play a role, and politicians use the media, and the media quite often uses politicians. And in this instance, as we saw during the whole tumultuous time of Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, the media can play a very toxic role. It can play a distorting role. Now, here you certainly haven't had the lead-up. You haven't had the active destabilisation in the media as Kevin Rudd was doing to Julia Gillard. So you don't have that backstory here. What you have is a feverish next, 12, 14, 16 hours, whatever it is. But as David pointed out a bit earlier, you just have to be extremely mindful that not to say so-and-so has the numbers, but to say this is what the camp is reporting, but to do your own due diligence. I don't think we are likely to see that sort of destabilisation again anytime soon that occurred during Julia Gillard's time by the Rudd forces. It was active, it was daily for nearly 3 years, and it's just not here.
Paul, I just want to...
Prime Minister, it was all Kevin Rudd.
That's got nothing to do with it.
But hang on, there was a leak
Paul,
there. All right, now I've received a message from somebody
some
very close to Scott Morrison here who says that he's made it very clear that he would never contest against Tony Abbott. He's holding to that very clear form of words, so as we've talked about here, which is if it is Malcolm Turnbull versus Tony Abbott, then Scott Morrison simply will be, presumably at this stage, supporting Tony Abbott. If Tony Abbott gets out of the way, well then it's game on and potentially Morrison is all the way in, but that is about as close as you can get to hearing from him tonight.
So in other words, if Tony Abbott runs, Morrison's out. Yeah. And you would think, based on what we're all hearing, that Turnbull's the favourite, but you never know.
But correct, but we've just made it all very clear.
Tony Abbott's going to run.
And also just about timing.
As we've reported for the last 15.
Yeah, but also just about timing here. Let's look here. Timing, it's 5:45 on the East Coast. No doubt both Bill Shorten due to speak in the next 15 minutes and most likely the Prime Minister after the top of the hour. They're holding off, apart from what's happening behind the scenes, because that's when the major free-to-air television network news takes place. So if they want to hit as many people to be heard in their own words, they will do it at the top of the next hour.
Sure, but there's so many MPs who are going to lose their seats here.
The PM you reckon will speak at 6 o'clock. It's 5:45 here in Canberra, so that everyone will carry that live as the breaking statement.
Because the truth is, what do they want? Do they want the talking heads of their own TV channels, or do you want the Prime Minister speaking to millions of people? Because it worked for him in February, where the people were able to ring the MPs, go off their nut and save his job. It seems that won't be the case this time around because Julie Bishop has made a more active involvement, and as Peter's been saying, we have a more active candidate now in Malcolm Turnbull. But for what it's worth, 6 o'clock matters because a lot more people are watching.
Yeah, but the rank and file may want him to save his job, but that doesn't mean the MPs don't want to save their job.
I agree.
This is what is going to come.
The MPs don't have to worry about the rank and file if they get re-elected.
But don't forget, Liberal pre-selections haven't happened yet. There's a lot of people who have branch members who will be calling into those MPs saying, if you drop a PM, I'll drop you. So don't be surprised.
That's exactly. Paul, can I make the point that I've just received a message from someone close to Turnbull who says a lot of them, MPs, and we're not just talking about Sydney or New South Wales, have had this urged on them by their branches. The complete opposite of what you're saying in terms of the base.
There's nothing I said here about what is the absolute mood of the base. But every time it's been polled, the preferred Liberal leader by Liberal voters is Tony Abbott. There are plenty of people who reach out and will be frustrated because the Liberal Party has done this. That does not mean that all Liberal MPs, all members of the Liberal Party or all Liberal supporters don't want it to happen. I'm just saying there is a strong rump of people who believe that the transactional cost, the moral thing that is traded away here, means there is no difference between the two political parties. And with 14% of the electorate saying none of the above or others, it's a shame Clive Palmer isn't running for the first time at this election rather than the last election.
Let me... oh, interesting. All right, I'm just hearing from a pretty good source here that Tony Abbott, and I'm surprised to report this, that Tony Abbott may have asked Joe Hockey to stand aside. Now, this is interesting. I've just received that. I'm not sure if anyone else has heard this. But whether this is part of a Scott Morrison play...
It's far too late. I mean, if that's the case, this just looks like desperation.
Yeah. I can offer a view on that.
Desperation, as far as I can tell. Your thoughts on that?
Well,
but I mean, to do it now, after the months and months of calls from the colleagues to do it, Pete?
Look, I think it smacks of desperation, but it doesn't mean it won't work for him. It depends what it does to Scott Morrison, of course. But a senior person in the Turnbull camp made it clear to me that they absolutely had the numbers, no question, no problem. The only thing that could change that is if the Prime Minister moved against Joe Hockey. But the argument, though, is that just delays it.
It's too late.
That may just delay an inevitability. It might actually move it to Morrison if Morrison takes it, and then ultimately the Prime Minister hands over if polls don't change going forward. But that is a diabolical mix for the government, I believe, and I believe it just starts the beginning of the end for Tony Abbott. However, there is some concern within the Turnbull camp that it might carve off Scott Morrison supporters if Scott Morrison jumps in on that one.
But that's the whole question. It's about Morrison now in terms of the internal movement in the party, isn't it, Richo, here, where the reason you make a last-minute appeal to him is to say, look, you get the job the other bloke's promising.
It divides the hell out of the party.
The problem is it's 5 minutes past midnight. It's not 5 minutes to midnight. The challenge has been actually announced. It's underway. Julie Bishop's joined it. It doesn't matter a rat's who he sacks, who he appoints. It's too late.
It's over. It's over for Abbott, surely.
Let me,
hang on,
Nikki Saver.
Can I just say? Hang on, can I just say directly?
I can say something. Sorry, I've got to say this from somebody right in the guts of the Abbott camp. They just told me that the idea that he asked Joe to step aside is completely wrong.
Correct. Somebody very close to the Treasurer. The exact quote is completely untrue.
Good.
Oh, there you go.
All right. There you go. All right. Well, as I say,
if we're both getting that, then you know it's untrue. You know it's untrue.
What we were just talking about the media being used.
Well, at least they're watching.
Yeah, they're watching.
That's right. That's right. All right. All right. Well, there's a lot of, shall we say, theorising going on. Nikki Saver, I think, is still with us. I mean, is there anything like that Tony Abbott can do at this late stage, and why do you think we haven't seen him yet?
Well, he's obviously trying to work out his course of action. But no, look, I agree with Richo. I think it's too late. Scott Morrison will win, really, whatever happens. But who will be Abbott's deputy going in after Julie Bishop? Because she will have to resign. She can't do what she did today and still stay as deputy leader to Abbott and still stay as foreign minister. So it looks like a very different government.
Didn't do that, but she probably should have, is what you're saying, like Malcolm Turnbull did, and say, I'm resigning.
Oh, I think she will. I think she will. I think she'll have to come out before the party room tomorrow and say that she's resigning as Deputy Leader and as Foreign Minister.
In the next stage.
Well, if she went and saw the Prime Minister today and told him that he should resign, and he's obviously said, no, I'm not going to, see you later.
But also,
then she has no choice but to resign as well, and then to recontest, presumably as Malcolm's deputy.
But also, Nikki Sava, what's been happening here for some time is that the cabinet's been leaking like a sieve, and often they are stories that are advantageous to the positions of Bishop and Turnbull. There would be part of the Abbott office and the Abbott operation that believes if we survive, if we hold on, we're able to flush out the leakers. So theoretically, they would not have the wreckers inside the tent. Sure, they'd make more of a Rudd-like noise on the outside than the inside, but there would be Abbott forces who would believe that while it might be 5 minutes to midnight, while it might be 1:45, they could get rid of two of the biggest leakers in one foul swoop.
Well, I think it's always a bit dangerous to try and, you know, point the finger at who might be leaking. We can all guess, but we don't know. And the other thing is that Julie Bishop is one of the most popular members of this government.
She's walked in and told the Prime Minister he's got to go.
Without her and without Malcolm Turnbull on his front bench?
Well, they can't serve a Prime Minister that they've either one resigned on or one asked to sack, to go. I'm not saying that this is what should happen.
That's what I'm saying. It would not be. It's not a very attractive government now, but without Turnbull and without
this, by the way, is why the
Bishop, it is even less attractive than it is now.
Of course,
all of this is why the PM's
in
in real trouble, because, you know, once the deputy does what Julie Bishop has done,
correct,
and you throw Malcolm in the mix, and you throw presumably a bunch of other ministers that will come out after we find out what the process is. How do you go on when that happens? It is just so difficult. It's easier, Paul. It's easier for anyone that is currently backing the Prime Minister, like Eric Abetz, although I doubt he'd be offered a place. Matthias Cormann being another one that we've heard is in there. He's a different kettle of fish. I think he would be offered a place, clearly. It's easier for them to stay on because you defend the incumbent, and then long live the king is dead, long live the new king.
No, correct.
It's harder the other way around.
Can I just say, historically, you're wrong. Historically, if you go back to the Hawke-Keating challenge, I have to say myself and half the cabinet was supporting Paul Keating for a good 6 months before the ballot, and we all stayed there, and everyone knew what we were doing. Because Bob Hawke was in no doubt. We all stayed, but it didn't interfere with the process of government. Everybody just kept doing their job.
You didn't challenge anyone.
Yeah, but
you didn't go into his
but
we knew we were going to.
No, but hang on. But what I'm saying is that let's not play the softly game where, oh, you know, we can't possibly speculate on who the leakers are. Well, the whole point is there's been consistent cabinet leakers. There's only so many people in the damn room. One of them's told the Prime Minister to quit. The other one has resigned himself. So it's not a crazy suggestion.
She'll go tonight. She'll go out and announce tonight that she's resigned.
And I think she'll do it at the 6
the
p.m. news.
That'll be the next part of the momentum that they're trying to build up.
Yeah,
I think they're holding her back in reserve.
I think that the Prime Minister, David Spears, I think that the Prime Minister knows that he does not have the numbers, and I believe that in his fighting spirit, a bit like what Julia Gillard did when you interviewed her before Kevin Rudd eventually beat her, I think that his mantra, his style, his approach, his entire fighting, ethos requires him to run and lose rather than be the kind of person that walks away from
the fight.
And he
wants to brand everyone on the way through, and he's got every right to do it.
He will run. He will run. Where the numbers lie at this stage is, we are all speculating and we are hearing from well-placed sources that Turnbull has the numbers by varying degrees. We are obviously, our reporters, Tom Connell, Laura Jays, etc., are on the phone to as many MPs as they can to try and get a good read of where the numbers are. I've just seen Latika Burke tweet that there are some 23 undecided votes in the Liberal Party. That's a significant number. That's arguably a decisive number. If there are 23 undecided, I don't think we can be that definitive about where this is going to land. And as Graham Richardson points out, it could be some days. We don't know when this ballot's going to be, and that could be decisive as well. Here's Bill Shorten.
Australians know that changing the leader of the Liberal Party changes nothing. Now, Malcolm Turnbull is right that Australia has been going nowhere for the last 2 years with this chaotic, dysfunctional, divided Liberal government. And Malcolm Turnbull is right when he says the last 2 years has been one of a Liberal government with slogans, not substance. A government of rising unemployment, of cuts to essential services, and a collapse in our growth. But Malcolm Turnbull is wrong when he says he is part of the solution. He has been an active member and minister of the Liberal government for the last 2 years. Malcolm Turnbull, along with all of his cabinet colleagues, have supported Tony Abbott and the Liberal government with 2 bad budgets, presided over rising unemployment, the same unfairness, the cuts to pensions, the cuts to schools, the cuts to hospitals, the $100,000 degrees, and the collapse of confidence in our economy. This is a minister who has presided over a slower second-rate NBN whilst managing to double the cost of the NBN. Australians know that Malcolm Turnbull is ambitious, but he's ambitious for himself, not our nation. With Malcolm, it will always be about Malcolm. Australians rejected Malcolm Turnbull when he was opposition leader